I recently completed the Lohen story quest on stream, and while for me the most shocking part was the fact that Adorno was not evil, for a lot of my chat, it was that they felt Lohen was not as he appeared in the trailer, which prompted disappointment. This sparked a conversation on what it means to be a character, whether the Lohen that we saw in the trailer is the same Lohen that we get in the story, and on the portrayal of crazy in stories. So let's get started by talking about the apparent discrepancy between Lohen in his trailer versus Lohen in his story. In the trailer, we see a far colder version of Lohen, and a far more, as many have described it, unhinged version. It almost feels comedic how deeply the trailer leans into his so-called crazy side. But what do people even mean by crazy? Without approaching this from an ethical standpoint, I want to talk about what makes his behavior seem irrational. Sure, killing people is certainly seen as irrational behavior, but this is not solely because it is typically seen as unethical. For example, Clorinde has presumably taken multiple lives. But because she sees this as a duty which contributes to maintaining the law, we may perceive her as having a greater reverence for life. Additionally, we may not view her quite as morally corrupt as we would Lohen. While our ethical assumptions influence how we can see Lohen, I don't think these alone contribute to how we view him. What distinguishes Lohen from the other characters that kill is the perceived distance between his mental state and ours. While in his story quest we didn't see behavior quite as outrightly dangerous as that in his trailer or even teaser, he still engages in activities that put people at risk. His disregard for rules and conventional methods of achieving his goals is consistent. His rebellious qualities are only part of what contributes to the crazy that people see in him. I think it's possible that when people use terms like crazy or insane to depict someone, they are admitting to a lack of understanding just as much as they are describing said person. This lack of understanding creates a difference between his mental state and our own. In the case of Lohen, his trailer does exactly this. It gives us an outside glimpse into his behavior without explaining it. We see him only from the outside looking in as he goes through a murderous frenzy. We see throat slashing, psychological torment, and stealthy attacks all executed while Lohen has a smile on his face. We are not posed with the question of why he enjoys such violence, nor are we encouraged to figure out who he is. This preserves the facade of crazy. However, his story quest does ask us to face those questions, and I don't think this should be surprising. While the quest did not, in my opinion, provide a satisfying arc, it was attempted. I don't think the story was necessarily meant to make him palatable to people, but I think when you're trying to write a satisfying narrative, there is going to be things that explain a character's personality and behavior, and this is generally going to make them easier to sympathize with, thus dispelling the illusion of crazy. In the case of Lohen, this is learning about his past experiences of feeling powerless and out of control. His fear and lack of self-worth all become factors driving his seemingly strange behavior. But, being that these emotions are easy for many people to relate to, he becomes more tangible. The Lohen who was once an inaccessible spectacle becomes a Lohen who is like us. You will see that in stories, like in life, there are reasons that people are the way they are, and the wholeheartedly insane characters that people want to see are not satisfying narratively, as the focus of a story. These kinds of characters, per se, don't make sense, and sense is a major part of what people look for in a story. Storytelling is a sense-making tool. Someone who enjoys hurting people is that way for a reason, whether that be a chemical or structural difference in the brain or any external factor. There is a reason people are the way they are. When we see these factors, we start to recognize people like Lohen as ourselves and more like the human that they are. We are a product of our brains and environment, and this is not something that you can avoid. Even in the case of someone being born with a predisposition to mental illness, that alone is not the sole determinant of who someone turns out to be. This is not to say that you have to like Lohen. For one thing, his story wasn't written all that well narratively, which inhibits our ability to understand him, and for another, personal taste is involved. Lowen's story quest allows us a glimpse into his subjective experience, to some degree, however. This is done so not just visually when we see him talking to a devilish version of himself, but also throughout by encouraging us to speculate on what it might feel like to be him. As we see in the story quest, characters are able to have different reactions to the same external factors which influence them. The contrast in reactions between Lohen and Theodore when being saved by Adorno was evident. Why Lohen was not crying, we cannot know for sure. Some people might suspect that he was already mentally unstable as a child, but we also have to consider that trauma responses come in great variety. While I don't think Lowen's story quest was presented effectively for a narrative, it is obvious what they were trying to get across in terms of the fact of Lowen's life. So, is the Lohen of the trailer the same as the Lohen from the story? I see no contradiction between the two, but mainly a shift in perspective. However, there are other elements which I see that could easily have led to disappointment. In my opinion, his narrative was lacking a satisfying arc, and tying into that, I think he was redeemed and let off the hook too easily. The connection between Lohen and Adorno didn't feel fleshed out enough for me, and I think Lohen went through a change in perspective too quickly upon Adorno being gravely injured by his own experiment. For someone who was supposed to be obsessed with achieving his goals, the lack of any lengthy inner conflict didn't feel right to me. I did have issues with the tone changes in the story as well, and his punishment did not seem fitting. I would have liked to see the story end on a more somber note, so I can also see this adding to frustrations. However, I don't want to get into a narrative critique of the story right now because it falls to the same pitfalls as most Genshin stories do, and was not unique in that. I want to focus more on the portrayal of a character as unhinged. On the one hand, Lohen was clearly made with an intended audience in mind. The fan service is evident, and in a way diminishes the complexity of one's mental state. It leans into displaying behavior which is often considered unacceptable in a way that is fun. I have to acknowledge that this certainly can be problematic ethically, but I do want to retain focus on why the very concept of unhinged characters is difficult narratively and metaphysically. At the same time, the quest allowed for a new point of view and forced us to face the reasons for his behavior. Through the attempt to make him real, we lose sight of the fantasy that a person can be simple to understand and merely an object of our interest. I don't think that violence-loving characters existing is necessarily a bad thing, but I do think that we have to set our expectations up properly. I also want to recognize that Genshin does like to make characters more palatable to people, but at the same time, I think making characters more palatable is an intrinsic result of telling a story, or at least attempting to. I do like his personality. I like seeing his enthusiasm for a fight and the joy which he finds from extreme experiences. I think what ultimately makes it interesting, however, is not his insanity. It's not that we cannot know what makes a person do and feel such things, but it's the potential that we have to understand something which may at first glance feel foreign to us. Anyways, these are just a few quick thoughts that I've had on Lohen. Let me know what you think in the comments, politely of course, and do join the Twitchlings, they're a lot of fun. And whatever you go on to do it well.